about the potassium family of these tissue salts, the potash. The ash of potassium is every organic farmer has known about since farming practices have begun. The problem is modern day farming practices are using NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. However, the potassium they are using is a low grade, low quality, toxic form of potassium that all our food is grown in. So we see a lot of toxic potassium. Now, when we understand potassium, the potash, it's also on the periodic table. We see it's not P, it's K. It's Kali. It's the alkali. It's the alkali potassium that has always been used and revered in cancer formulas. In fact, Max Gerson, the most famous cancer doctor, he always had his patients on herbal supplements loaded with potassium, potassium-rich foods, potassium supplements, potassium iodide, because he understood the alkaline power of potassium. And when we become too acidic, it's that acidity that becomes destructive, leading to all our degenerative diseases, our autoimmune diseases, and of course, the cancers. Also, the famous Harry Hoxsey, the Hoxsey formula, which was a very popular cancer herbal formula loaded with potassium iodide, other herbs, which were very rich in potassium, because potassium is the alkaline reserve mineral, and that deals with the acids that create the acidic environment that become the destructive diseases. So the Hoxsey formula, Max Gerson understood how important potassium is. Now, potassium stabilizes the cell membrane. It works very tightly with sodium, and sodium lives on the outside mostly, and potassium lives mostly on the inside. And when an action potential is generated, and that action potential is anytime you think, blink, eat, secrete, do anything, it's because of an action potential. And that action potential is propagated via the influx of sodium coming in, or sodium coming in, potassium leaving the cell. And that generates an action potential. And when it hits threshold, then the calcium gated channels will be released. And magnesium is a player in that, because magnesium has to now kick the sodium back out of the cell and put the potassium back into the cell. And that requires the magnesium dependent ATPases. And that's where we need that energy source ATP. So potassium in this presentation, when we get into the tissue salts, you always want to know the affinity for the mineral. And when we say potassium has everything to do with cell membrane permeability, and with sodium, they're the great solvent minerals. They dissolve things. And when they dissolve things, because remember that sodium is going to draw water, and that potassium with that fiery element, when you throw potassium into water, water's loaded with oxygen, it's mostly oxygen, and then it reacts, it catches fire. So we got that fire, Kali, destructive, powerful energy of potassium, and working as a solvent mineral with sodium to dissolve the minerals, keeping calcium in solution. Now, when calcium precipitates out of solution because of low sodium and potassium, then it's that calcium that leads to all our deposition diseases, which are our chronic diseases of atherosclerosis, arterial sclerosis, gallstones, kidney stones, stones, cataracts, joint depositions. It can go into any organ, gland, tissue, eventually resulting in rigor mortis, in which all the calcium channels are released, because magnesium now, the spark of life, is no longer there to oppose calcium. So it's very important to understand that potassium is needed for that cell membrane, for the absolute power of excitable tissue. So all excitable tissues, neurons, heart cells, muscle cells, etc. So we think of potassium, we think of the brain and the heart, and we see potassium is always going to be, it has to be in our radar when we're looking at heart with tachycardias, anxieties, that real racing type of heart type of syndromes, that we have to understand the potassium angle to that. Also with the brain, when we see a lot of neurasthenias and a lot of mental stuff, we're going to think potassium. So we're going to look at the tissue salts, potassium. Now, the 4 cations, sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium, these 4 cations to make a salt need the anions. The positive needs the negative. And so we're going to look at potassium phosphate, we're going to look at potassium sulfate, and potassium chloride. Whenever we say chloride, Muriaticum is chloride. All right, so let's take a look at these tissue salts, and we will go to the next slide. We're going to look at Kali Mur. So when I think of Kali Mur, potassium chloride, this remedy, I think of as a child remedy, but don't have prejudice, stay flexible, and understand when I say a child remedy, we see it very prevalent with, children with a lot of chronic air stuff, the glue airs, the otitis medias, the swimmer's airs, the air, especially when they're in the airplane. In fact, it's #1 when we have children that are up in the airplanes and they get the blocked eustachian tubes. And if we can't pop them open, they're going to be monsters on that flight. Kali Mur actually pops the canals open, and it works 99% of the time. So Kali Mur is great for the chronic airs, the sinusitis, the allergies. And the keynote to it, it's going to have more of a white discharge. It's going to have that raw egg type of consistency, the white part, and it's going to have that ropey, gluey, gooey type of consistency. And that's the mucus, because this is a convalescent remedy. So it's coming after the acute phase. And now we have the die-off. The cells are dying, the bacteria is dying, the microbes are all dying. So we got a lot of dead debris, and then we get the discharge. And when that discharge is white, Kali Mur comes in and helps to mop that stuff up to get it out of the body. And the discharges can be sinus cavities, the airs, it could be crustaceans in the eyes, it could be the throat, it could be the sputum from asthma, from cold, flu, cough type of stuff. So it is a wonderful remedy for this kind of convalescent chronic allergy, chronic allergies, and just inflammation in the sinus cavities with any sinusitis and air. And think airplanes, think children. Now it is ruled by Gemini, and Gemini is ruled by the planet Mercury. And when children go into a Mercury cycle, ages 7 to 14, that's when we see Mercury, the lungs, the 2 lungs. Mercury is the twins. So it's got that duality to it. And we see it has an association with higher learning and communication. And as children are learning how to communicate to peers and to friends and to siblings and everyone, it's always a challenge as they're learning how to read, learning how to put word structures together, writing sentences. The conflict that they have also presents itself as the outer conflict in the sinusitis, in the allergies, in the air. Maybe they're not listening, maybe they're not seeing, maybe they're not speaking. So we see the symbolic relationship as above, so below. So this is one perspective on how we can prescribe this remedy. We're always looking at the mentals and the physicals and making these, connections. So it is a Gemini, but again, you don't have to be a child. You don't have to be born in Gemini. This is a beautiful remedy for that chronic white discharge stuff. You'll see the white tongue. You'll see the candida and the maybe it's vaginal discharges with that white mucousy consistency. So it's a good chronic remedy. Let's see if I forgot anything that I wanted to talk about. Kali Mur discharge. Nausea remedy. It's a good nausea remedy, especially nausea during pregnancy, hormonal situations. Also from fatty foods. So when you see someone is getting nauseous from eating some fatty foods and pastries, probably foods you shouldn't eat, but we eat them. And sometimes they may react very negatively to the fatty foods and they get the nausea. Think Kali Mur. Great, great little remedy that should be employed or in our radar when we start to think of some of these themes. All right, let's take a look at Kali phos. This is one of my all-time favorite tissue salts, potassium phosphate. Most of your brain, the gray matter of your brain, is mostly made up of potassium phosphate. So this is going to have an affinity for the brain. When our brain becomes overworked, overtaxed, we're overthinking, we're worrying, we're stressing, we're not sleeping. We've had presentations that we had to prepare for. We were the tax man through the tax season. We just can't take it. So we kind of short circuit the brain. We don't think, we become forgetful. So it has a lot of brain stuff. And it's truly called the homeopathic Valium because it untethers the nervous system. It relaxes the nervous system. So it's great for depression, for insomnia, anxiety, irritability, any kind of nervous type of tension. So love it for part of a sleep tonic. So when we have the insomnias, this can be a great tissue salt with the other salts as a beautiful sleep tonic to help with insomnia. It is an Aries. Remember, Aries rules the cerebrum, where Taurus rules the cerebellum, and Mercury rules the throat and the lungs, and Cancer is the breast and the stomach, and Leo is the heart. And so Aries absolutely has that head-brain connection. But again, we don't have to be born in Aries to prescribe Kali phos. This is a overtaxed, overutilizing our brain where it just kind of shuts down. We see this in students going through finals. We see it in young children when they're taking on new information and they're struggling and they become conflicted and they get the headaches. And the headaches are going to be more of a dull headache, and they may be on the top of the head, but they can be in the occiput, but we'll see it mostly there, but it's of a dull type of a headache. And this is a great cell salt, one of my favorite tissue salts, because we're all having this kind of burnout in the brain. And so we call it brain fatigue, or the old term is brain fag, which is brain fatigue, and today it's brain fog. So we have this fog over our brain. We're just not thinking, we're not firing on all cylinders. And it's like there's a short circuit. And so this is where this remedy is indispensable in helping the reconnection of that gray matter in the brain. All right, next tissue salt, Kali sulph. Kali sulph works well with oxygen. So Kali sulph, and when we think sulfur, think again the liver, but I said it works with oxygen, so it works with iron phosphate. So iron phosphate delivers the oxygen, where Kali sulph helps to exchange the oxygen. So those two remedies work well when we're dealing with oxygenation issues. But Kali sulph absolutely is part of the lungs and that oxygenation there. And we may see that with some asthma, some chronic asthma. And this time when you see sulfur, we're thinking yellow. So maybe the sputum, the mucus discharge is going to have a more yellow tone to them. So Kali sulph loves the mucous membranes and those mucous membranes. So remember, when the liver, sulfur, think liver, when that liver gets congested, and it just can't deal with the toxic load, and we're creating too many acids, and we're not processing out the chemicals at the rate they're coming in, then the liver has to deal with these toxins. And what happens is they get funneled to the largest organ, the skin. And then we start to see the dirty skin, unhealthy skin, eczema skin, psoriatic skin, the dry skin, the cracking skin, especially the dandruff, #1 dandruff remedy. So when we have dandruff and cracked heels, think liver. And that liver, if it's not dealt with, will become fatty, and it's probably on the verge of a fatty liver when we start to have that chronic dandruff and that chronic dry skin and the chronic skin stuff. And so this is a great skin remedy, and it's kind of the chronic of pulsatilla. So if we're familiar with pulsatilla, one of the most famous homeopathic remedies, and pulsatilla needs that fresh air. And so the sulfur in the lungs, this is where it wants that fresh air. So this is a good, kind of chronic of pulsatilla, but think yellow color, yellow discharges, that yellow sinusitis, the yellow blockages, yellow crustaceans in the eye, the sputum coming out of the throat. So it's going to have a lot of skin, a lot of lungs, and it's an oxygenator. So let's see if I forgot anything about Kali Sulph. Talked about works well with iron phosphate, skin. It's a big skin, #1 dandruff remedy. Forgot about the cloasma, the estrogen mass. When we see that estrogen mass, think Kali Sulph. And that estrogen mass will be maybe during pregnancy times or birth control time. So we're going to keep our radar on that. So this is another wonderful remedy. So when we think skin, I'm thinking of the Trinity. I'm thinking the calcium sulfate. I'm thinking the Kali sulfate and the silica. That's a trinity for the skin to help regenerate, regrow, to help heal, to build up new cells, clean out the dead cells. Great skin tonic. All right, that's it for now. We'll move on to the next tissue family.